The sparks flew upward into the twilight air as Nora Vickers brought the hammer down with practiced force, her leather apron scorched from years of working beside her father at the forge in Idaho City, Idaho Territory. And though she had turned 22 just last month, she knew the townsfolk still whispered about how unnatural it was for a woman to swing a 5-pound hammer with such strength and skill. The year was 1877, and the mining town had seen better days since the gold rush fever had cooled, but there were still enough prospectors, ranchers, and drifters passing through to keep the Vickers smithy busy from dawn until dusk. Nora wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her gloved hand, leaving a smudge of soot across her forehead. Her dark auburn hair was tied back in a severe bun, though several rebellious strands had escaped to frame her angular face. She had her mother's green eyes, people said, though Nora barely remembered the woman who had died bringing her younger brother into the world when Nora was only 7. That brother, Timothy, had died of scarlet fever 2 winters ago at the age of 13, and since then, it had been just Nora and her father Marcus keeping the forge alive. Marcus Vickers was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s whose hands bore the permanent stains and scars of his trade. He had taught Nora everything he knew, never once suggesting that she should pursue more ladylike endeavors, much to the displeasure of the churchwomen who clucked their tongues whenever Nora walked past in her work clothes, smelling of smoke and metal. Nora plunged the horseshoe she had been shaping into the water barrel, creating a hissing cloud of steam. The shoe was nearly perfect, its curve smooth and even, the nail holes precisely placed. She examined it with a critical eye before setting it aside with the other 3 she had completed that afternoon. These were for Mrs. Patterson's mare, a skittish bay that required special handling. "That is fine work, daughter," Marcus said, emerging from the back room where he had been repairing a broken wagon axle. His voice carried the slight rasp of a man who had breathed in too much smoke over too many years. "Better than fine. You have surpassed your old father's skill." "Nonsense," Nora replied, though she felt a warm glow of pride at his words. "You taught me everything I know." "I taught you the basics," Marcus corrected, moving to inspect the horseshoes himself. "But you have taken those lessons and made them your own. There is artistry in these curves, precision in the weight. Any horse would be lucky to wear shoes crafted by your hands." Before Nora could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention to the dusty street outside the open smithy doors. A rider was approaching, silhouetted against the setting sun that painted the Idaho mountains in shades of gold and crimson. As he drew closer, Nora could make out more details. A tall man astride a handsome chestnut gelding, wearing the practical clothing of someone who spent his life on the range. His hat was pulled low against the sun, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, and the way he sat his horse with the easy confidence of an experienced rider. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, looping his reins around the hitching post before approaching the forge. As he stepped into the light cast by the glowing coals, Nora got her first clear look at his face. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the sky just before a summer storm. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and his brown hair was overlong, curling slightly at his collar. There was a tiredness around his eyes that spoke of long days in the saddle, but also a warmth in his expression as he nodded respectfully to both Nora and her father. "Evening, folks," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that suggested he had come from somewhere south of Idaho Territory. "I am hoping you might have time to look at my horse. He threw a shoe about 5 miles back, and I have been walking him in ever since." "Of course," Marcus replied immediately, the consummate professional. Bring him around and let us have a look." The stranger led his gelding into the smithy, speaking softly to the animal as they moved. Nora watched as her father lifted the horse's hoof, examining it with gentle efficiency. The horse stood calmly, clearly accustomed to such handling. "No damage to the hoof," Marcus announced. "You did right by walking him in rather than riding. Some men would have pushed on regardless and caused real injury." "What is your name, son?" "Wesley Quinn," the stranger replied. "And I appreciate you seeing to him so late in the day. Thunder here has carried me faithfully for 3 years now. I would not want him suffering on account of my poor planning." "No poor planning in losing a shoe," Marcus said dismissively. "It happens to the best maintained animals." "This will not take long. Nora, would you measure Thunder's hoof? I believe we have shoes in his size, but best to be certain." Nora stepped forward, suddenly very aware of Wesley Quinn's attention as she knelt beside the horse. She ran her practiced hands over Thunder's leg, murmuring softly to him as she had learned to do with nervous animals. Thunder, however, seemed perfectly content, and she was able to take her measurements quickly. "We have the right size," she confirmed, rising to her feet and finding herself unexpectedly close to Wesley. He was taller than she had initially thought, and she caught the scent of leather, horse, and something else, something clean like sage after rain. "You work the forge?" Wesley asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice rather than the skepticism or disapproval Nora usually encountered. "I do," she replied, meeting his eyes directly. "My father and I run this smithy together." "That is remarkable," Wesley said, and his smile reached his eyes. "I have been from Texas to Montana Territory, and I cannot say I have ever met a female blacksmith before. How long have you been at the trade?" "Since I was old enough to lift a hammer," Nora replied. 15 years, give or take." "Then Thunder is in excellent hands," Wesley said warmly. "The best smiths are the ones who start young and never stop learning." Marcus had already selected an appropriate shoe and was heating it in the forge, pumping the bellows to bring the coals to the right temperature. Nora moved to assist him, falling into their familiar rhythm of work. Wesley stepped back to give them space but did not look away, watching with apparent fascination as they worked together. "You are a cowboy?" Marcus asked conversationally as he worked, the question directed at Wesley. "I am," Wesley confirmed. "Been working cattle since I was old enough to sit a horse. Most recently, I was with an outfit down in Nevada, but that work dried up come fall. I heard there might be ranching opportunities up this way, so I thought I would ride through and see what I could find." "There are a few spreads hiring," Marcus said. "The Rocking H Ranch, about 10 miles east of here, lost several hands to the silver strikes in Colorado. The foreman, Jack Hutchinson, is a fair man if you are looking for honest work." "I appreciate the information," Wesley replied. "Truth be told, I am looking to do more than just hire on somewhere. I have been saving my wages for the better part of 6 years now. My goal is to start my own small operation. Nothing grand, just enough land to run a modest herd and make an honest living." "A worthy ambition," Marcus said approvingly. He had finished shaping the shoe and now began the process of fitting it to Thunder's hoof, working with swift precision. "Land can still be claimed if you know where to look and are willing to work it. The territory offers opportunities for men with vision and determination." Nora found herself glancing at Wesley more often than she should, and several times she caught him looking at her as well. Each time their eyes met, he offered that warm smile, and she felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat from the forge. "There," Marcus announced, straightening from his work. "All done. That shoe will hold firm and the fit is good. Thunder should carry you wherever you need to go without any trouble." Wesley moved forward to inspect the work, running his hand appreciatively over the shoe. "That is masterful work, sir. What do I owe you?" Marcus quoted a fair price, and Wesley paid without hesitation, adding an extra coin. "For the quality and the advice about the rocking H," he explained when Marcus began to protest. "You are generous," Marcus said, pocketing the money. "If you are staying in town, the boarding house 2 streets over serves decent meals and has clean rooms." "I will head there directly," Wesley said. He gathered Thunder's reins but paused before mounting, his attention turning to Nora. "I wonder if I might impose on your hospitality once more. Would it be acceptable for me to return tomorrow? I find myself curious about your craft, and I have never had the opportunity to watch a skilled blacksmith at work. Male or female?" he added with a slight grin. Nora felt her father's eyes on her, reading the situation with the perceptiveness of a parent who knew his daughter well. "We are here most days from dawn until dusk," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the unexpected acceleration of her heartbeat. "You would be welcome to visit, though I cannot promise the work will be particularly interesting to watch." "I suspect I would find it fascinating," Wesley said. "Until tomorrow, then, and thank you both again for your excellent work." They watched him ride away into the deepening twilight, and Nora was acutely aware that her father was studying her profile with knowing eyes. "He seems like a decent young man," Marcus observed casually, too casually. "He seems polite enough," Nora replied, busying herself with banking the forge for the night. "Polite, well-mannered, respectful, and unless my eyes deceive me, quite taken with my daughter." "Father," Nora protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the forge. "I am simply making an observation," Marcus continued, his tone light but his expression serious. "You are 22 years old, Nora. I have never pushed you toward marriage because I needed your help here, but I would be a poor father indeed if I did not want to see you happy, to see you build a life beyond these walls." "I am happy here," Nora said, and it was true mostly. The smithy was her world, had been for as long as she could remember. The idea of leaving it, of pursuing the conventional path of marriage and children, had always seemed like a betrayal of everything her father had taught her, of the skills she had worked so hard to master. "You are content," Marcus corrected gently. "But content and happy are not always the same thing. I see how you look at the young families in town, how your eyes linger on the children. I know you, daughter. You have a heart that longs for more than sparks and iron, even if you will not admit it to yourself." Nora did not respond, could not respond, because her father's words had struck too close to a truth she had been avoiding for years. Yes, she loved the forge, loved the satisfaction of creating something useful and beautiful from raw metal. But there were lonely nights when she lay in her narrow bed above the smithy, listening to the creaks and groans of the building, when she wondered what it might be like to have someone beside her. To build a different kind of future than the one she had always assumed was her only option. That night, lying in that same narrow bed, Nora found her thoughts returning again and again to Wesley Quinn. There had been something in the way he looked at her, a regard that had nothing to do with curiosity about her unusual profession, and everything to do with the woman behind the leather apron. It had been a long time since any man had looked at her that way, and she discovered that she liked it more than she wanted to admit. True to his word, Wesley appeared at the smithy shortly after dawn the next morning. Nora was already at work, having spent a restless night and decided that physical labor might settle her tumbling thoughts. She was shaping a gate hinge when she heard his footsteps, and she looked up to find him standing in the doorway, backlit by the early morning sun. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I am not too early." "Not at all," Nora replied, setting down her hammer. We have been at work for an hour already. There is coffee on the pot if you would like some. It is strong enough to strip paint, fair warning." Wesley laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the space. "I like my coffee strong. A man could float a horseshoe in most of the coffee I have had on the trail." He poured himself a cup from the battered tin pot that sat on a small stove in the corner, then settled himself on a bench where he could watch Nora work without being in the way. Marcus was already occupied with repairing a broken plow blade, the ring of his hammer providing a steady rhythm to the morning. "What are you making?" Wesley asked, genuine interest evident in his voice. "Hinges for a gate at the Methodist church," Nora explained, returning to her work. "They need to be strong enough to support a heavy wooden gate, but decorative enough to satisfy Mrs. Thornton, who has very specific ideas about aesthetics." "That sounds like a challenging balance." "It is," Nora admitted, "but I enjoy the challenge. Anyone can make something functional. The artistry comes in making something both functional and beautiful." She fell into the rhythm of her work, and as the morning progressed, she found that Wesley's presence became less distracting and more comfortable. He asked intelligent questions about the process, showing genuine interest in understanding not just what she was doing but why. Unlike many men who had visited the smithy over the years, he did not question her capabilities or offer unsolicited advice. He simply watched and learned, occasionally offering comments that showed he was processing the information thoughtfully. Around mid-morning, Marcus announced he was going to deliver the repaired plow blade to the farmer who owned it, leaving Nora and Wesley alone in the smithy. The change in atmosphere was subtle but unmistakable, a new awareness humming between them like the vibration of a struck anvil. "May I ask you something?" Wesley said after a few moments of companionable silence. "Of course," Nora replied, though her hands continued their work. "Do you ever resent it? The life you have chosen, or that has been chosen for you, working here instead of pursuing a more conventional path?" Nora considered the question carefully before answering. "I used to wonder if I was missing something, particularly when I was younger and saw other girls my age courting and marrying. But the truth is, I love this work. There is something deeply satisfying about taking raw metal and shaping it into something useful, something that will last for years or even generations. I am good at what I do, and that matters to me." "But," Wesley prompted gently, hearing the unspoken reservation in her voice. Nora set down her hammer and met his eyes directly. "But lately, I have been wondering if loving my work and wanting other things in life are truly as mutually exclusive as I have always believed them to be." "They are not," Wesley said with quiet conviction. "Or at least, they should not be. A person should be able to pursue their craft and still have a full life, with family and love and all the things that make existence meaningful." "That is easy to say and harder to find," Nora replied. "Most men I have met would not tolerate a wife who spent her days at a forge. They want someone to keep their house, raise their children, and exist within the narrow confines of what society deems appropriate for a woman." "Then most men are fools," Wesley said bluntly. "If I may be so bold, Miss Vickers, I think a man would be lucky beyond measure to have a wife who was skilled, intelligent, and passionate about her work. Those qualities do not diminish a woman. They enhance her." Nora felt her breath catch at the intensity in his eyes, at the sincerity in his words. "You are either very progressive in your thinking, Mr. Quinn, or you are telling me what you think I want to hear." "I am telling you what I believe," Wesley replied, rising from the bench and moving closer, though he maintained a respectful distance. "My mother was not a blacksmith, but she was a gifted seamstress who made clothing for half the women in our town in Texas. She worked hard, built a successful business, and still managed to raise 3 sons who adored her. My father supported her every step of the way because he understood that her success did not diminish his own, and her happiness made their marriage stronger, not weaker. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, Wesley said, a note of sadness entering his voice. She passed away 5 years ago, and my father followed her less than a year later. People said he died of a fever, but I always thought he died of a broken heart. They were true partners in every sense of the word. I am sorry for your losses, Nora said softly. Thank you, but I am grateful for the example they set. They showed me what a real marriage could be, built on mutual respect and support, rather than one person sacrificing their dreams for the other. They stood there for a long moment, the forge fire crackling between them, and Nora felt something shift in her chest, like a door she had kept locked for years was suddenly opening just a crack. "Why are you really here, Mr. Quinn?" she asked quietly. "It cannot simply be curiosity about blacksmithing." Wesley smiled, a slow, genuine expression that transformed his face. "You are right. I came back because from the moment I saw you yesterday evening, standing there in your work apron with soot on your face and confidence in your eyes, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. I know that is forward of me, and if I am misreading the situation, I apologize. But life is too short and uncertain to waste time on false pretenses. I wanted to see you again, to talk with you, to begin to know the remarkable woman behind that hammer." Nora's heart was racing now, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "That is quite the declaration from someone who has known me for less than a day." "Sometimes a day is enough to recognize something worth pursuing," Wesley replied. "But I am not asking you to make any declarations in return. I am simply being honest about my intentions. I would like to spend more time with you if you are willing. I would like to know your thoughts and your dreams, to understand what makes you laugh and what you hold dear. And if, after some time, you find that you enjoy my company as much as I enjoy yours, well, then we can see where that path leads." Nora knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart against this stranger who spoke pretty words that might mean nothing. But there was something in Wesley's eyes, a steadiness and sincerity that made her want to take the risk. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "I would like to know you better, Wesley Quinn." The smile he gave her was brighter than the forge fire, and Nora found herself smiling back, feeling lighter than she had in years. Over the following weeks, Wesley became a regular presence at the Vickers smithy. He took Marcus up on his suggestion and secured work at the Rocking H Ranch, which meant he was in town frequently for supplies and had legitimate reasons to stop by the forge. But everyone, including Marcus, knew that the real draw was Nora herself. Wesley proved to be everything his initial impression had suggested: hardworking, honest, thoughtful, and unfailingly respectful. He never interfered with Nora's work, never suggested she should be doing something different or more ladylike. Instead, he brought her lunch from the boarding house on days when she was too busy to stop and eat. He listened with genuine interest when she talked about new techniques she wanted to try or challenges she was working through. He asked her opinions on everything from politics to philosophy, treating her insights with the same respect he would afford any man. But it was the small gestures that truly won Nora's heart. The way he always made sure her coffee cup was full. How he noticed when she was favoring her right shoulder after a long day at the Anvil, and offered to rub the soreness away with strong, careful hands. The bouquet of wildflowers he brought her one afternoon, not expensive hothouse roses but simple mountain blooms that he had gathered himself during his lunch break at the ranch. "They reminded me of you," he had said simply. "Beautiful, resilient, and perfectly suited to this rugged landscape." Marcus, for his part, approved of the developing relationship with transparent delight. He found reasons to leave Nora and Wesley alone in the smithy, and he began making comments about how the business could certainly support two smiths if one of them had other responsibilities, like a husband and family. "You are not subtle, Father," Nora told him one evening after Wesley had left for the night. "I am not trying to be subtle," Marcus replied cheerfully. "I am trying to make sure you do not let a good man slip through your fingers because you are too stubborn or too afraid to reach for happiness." "I am not afraid," Nora protested. "Then what are you?" Nora was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Cautious," she finally said. "What we have been building here, you and I, it matters. I do not want to lose it." "You would not lose it," Marcus assured her. "The smithy will always be here, and you will always have a place at this forge, whether you are married or single, a mother or childless. That will never change, Nora. I promise you that." His words settled something in Nora's heart, easing a fear she had not fully acknowledged even to herself. That night, when she climbed the stairs to her small room, she found herself imagining a different future than the one she had always assumed was hers. A future that included the clang of the anvil and the cry of children, the heat of the forge and the warmth of a husband's embrace. It was a crisp October afternoon when Wesley asked her to go riding with him. Nora had been working since before dawn on a complex commission, a set of decorative railings for the new hotel being built on Main Street, and she was ready for a break. She changed out of her work clothes into a simple riding dress, pinned her hair more neatly, and met Wesley outside where he waited with Thunder and a pretty little mare he had borrowed from the Rocking H. They rode out of town and up into the foothills, where the aspens were turning gold and the air smelled of pine and coming winter. Wesley led them to a small meadow where a creek ran clear and cold, its banks lined with smooth stones. "I found this place last week," Wesley said as they dismounted. "I thought you might like it." "It is beautiful," Nora said honestly, turning slowly to take in the view. The meadow was sheltered on 3 sides by forest, but the 4th side opened onto a vista that looked down over the valley. Idaho City, visible as a collection of small buildings in the distance. They sat on a fallen log near the creek, and Wesley pulled food from his saddlebags, simple fare but thoughtfully prepared: bread, cheese, apples, and even a small jar of honey. "A feast," Nora said with a smile. "You work so hard," Wesley replied. "You deserve good food and peaceful moments." They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the creek and the wind in the trees. When they had finished, Wesley shifted on the log to face her more directly, and Nora felt her pulse quicken at the serious expression on his face. "Nora," he began, and the use of her first name, which he rarely employed, told her this was a significant moment. "I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but I need to be honest with you about my feelings and my intentions." "All right," Nora said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am falling in love with you," Wesley said simply. "No, that is not quite right. I think I fell in love with you that first evening when you looked at me with those sharp green eyes and did not flinch from being exactly who you are. Every day since then has only deepened what I feel. You are unlike any woman I have ever met, not just because of your work, but because of who you are at your core. You are strong and skilled, yes, but you are also kind and thoughtful and fiercely loyal to those you care about. You have a laugh that makes me want to spend my life finding ways to hear it more often. And when you smile at me, really smile, I feel like the luckiest man in Idaho Territory." Nora felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the raw honesty in his words. "Wesley, Please, let me finish," he said gently. "I know that conventional courtship suggests I should wait longer, should take more time before speaking so plainly. But I am not a conventional man, and you are not a conventional woman. Life taught me, when I lost my parents, that time is precious and should not be wasted. So I am going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer because I am deadly serious." He slid off the log and onto one knee in the grass before her, and Nora's breath caught in her throat. "Nora Vickers, would you consider forging a future with me at your anvil? I am not asking you to give up your work or change who you are. I am asking you to let me build a life alongside you, supporting your craft and your dreams while we create something new together. I want to buy land, start a small ranch, and build a home where you can have both a smithy and a family, where our children can grow up knowing that their mother is a master of her trade, and that there is no shame in a woman being strong and skilled and independent. I want to wake up beside you for the rest of my life and fall asleep counting the reasons I am grateful you chose me. I want to be your partner in every sense of that word. Will you marry me?" Nora looked down at him, at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had not known she was praying, and she felt a certainty settle over her like a warm blanket on a cold night. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear in the mountain air. "Yes, Wesley, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was worth every moment of caution and fear she had carried. He stood and pulled her into his arms, and when he kissed her, gentle at first and then with growing passion, Nora felt like she was finally, truly home. They returned to town as the sun was setting, riding close together, their hands brushing whenever the trail allowed. Marcus took one look at their faces when they entered the smithy and let out a whoop of delight. "Finally," he declared. "I was beginning to think I would have to lock you two in the storage room until you worked things out." "We worked things out," Wesley said, his arm around Nora's waist. "And I am asking for your blessing, sir, to marry your daughter." "You have it, and gladly," Marcus replied, shaking Wesley's hand firmly. "I cannot think of a better man to entrust her to, though I suspect Nora would object to the notion of being entrusted to anyone." "Too right," Nora said, but she was smiling. "I am choosing him, not being given away like property." "And that is exactly as it should be," Wesley agreed. They were married 6 weeks later, in early December of 1877, in a simple ceremony at the Methodist church, whose gate now bore Nora's beautiful hinges. The whole town turned out, curious to see the blacksmith's daughter wed to the cowboy who had so thoroughly captured her heart. Nora wore a dress of deep green silk, purchased from the one shop in town that carried such fine goods, and she carried a bouquet of evergreen boughs tied with ribbon, since flowers were scarce in the mountain winter. Wesley stood at the altar in his best clothes, his face shining with such obvious love and joy that even the most cynical of the townswomen had to admit it was romantic. When the preacher asked if he would take Nora as his wife, Wesley's "I will" rang out strong and sure. And when it was Nora's turn, she spoke her own vows with equal conviction, promising to love and honor this man who had seen her for who she truly was, and loved her not despite her unconventionality but because of it. The wedding breakfast was held at the boarding house, where Mrs. Chen, the proprietress, had prepared a feast that included dishes from her native China alongside more traditional American fare. It was a joyous occasion, with music and dancing and the kind of genuine celebration that comes when a community witnesses two people truly suited for each other finding their happiness. As the afternoon wore on, Wesley pulled Nora aside into a quiet corner. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "A wedding gift." He pulled out a folded piece of paper, and when Nora opened it, she found herself looking at a property deed. 160 acres of land, 5 miles east of Idaho City, with a creek running through it and mountain views that would take her breath away every morning for the rest of her life. "Wesley," she breathed, "how did you?" "I have been saving for 6 years," he reminded her. "And your father and I may have pooled our resources. The land is in both our names, Nora. Yours and mine, equal partners. There is good grazing for cattle, plenty of water, and a stand of timber we can use to build a house and a smithy. We can start our ranch, our real future together." Nora threw her arms around his neck, the deed crumpling between them. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "I am far from perfect," Wesley said with a laugh, "but I promise to spend my life trying to be the man you deserve." They spent their first night as husband and wife in the best room at the boarding house, which Mrs. Chen had decorated with candles and evergreen boughs. Nora had been nervous about this intimacy, despite her love for Wesley, but he was patient and tender, treating her with a reverence that made her feel cherished rather than simply desired. They learned each other slowly, trading kisses and caresses and whispered words, until nervousness gave way to pleasure, and pleasure gave way to a profound sense of rightness. Afterward, lying in Wesley's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Nora felt a completeness she had never experienced before. She had not known it was possible to feel this way, to be so thoroughly seen and loved and accepted. "What are you thinking?" Wesley asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I am thinking that I never believed I could have this," Nora admitted. "My work and a partner who truly values me. It seemed like an impossible dream." "It is not impossible," Wesley assured her. "It is just rare." "But we are going to prove that it is possible, Nora. We are going to build something extraordinary together. I promise you that." And he kept that promise. They moved onto their land in early spring of 1878, living in a large tent while they worked on building their house. Wesley proved to be as skilled with carpentry as he was with horses and cattle, and with help from Marcus and several hands from the Rocking H, they had a sturdy 2-story house completed by midsummer. But the structure Nora was most excited about was the smithy that Wesley built for her, positioned a safe distance from the house, but still close enough that she could move between them easily. It was larger than the smithy in town, with better ventilation and workspace for multiple projects. Wesley had even included large windows, something unusual in a forge building because he knew Nora loved natural light. "It is incredible," Nora said when he showed her the finished building. "Wesley, this must have cost." "It cost exactly what it needed to cost," Wesley interrupted gently. "This is your space, Nora. Your place to create and work and practice your craft. I want you to have every advantage, every tool you need to do your best work." The smithy became the heart of their small ranch in many ways. Nora continued to take commissions from town, and her reputation as a master blacksmith only grew. But she also made the tools and hardware needed for their own operation, from hinges for the barn doors to the branding iron that bore their combined initials, WQ and NV intertwined. Wesley, true to his word, treated her as a full partner in every decision about the ranch. They chose their first cattle together, a small herd of 25 head that they purchased from a rancher liquidating his stock. They planned their grazing rotation together, discussing the best use of their land. When it came time to hire help, Nora interviewed the candidates alongside Wesley, and her opinions carried equal weight. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The work was hard and constant, the kind of labor that left them both exhausted at the end of each day. There were setbacks, a late frost that killed their kitchen garden, 2 calves lost to a mountain lion, a dry spell that lowered the creek and had them worried about water for the cattle. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, drawing strength from each other. On difficult days, Wesley would appear at the smithy door with cold water and an encouraging word. When Wesley was discouraged about the ranch's slow growth, Nora would sit with him in the evening, helping him work through problems, and reminding him that they were building something that would last, and that meant building slowly and carefully. The townspeople, who had been skeptical at first about their unconventional arrangement, gradually came to respect what Nora and Wesley had built together. It was hard to argue with success, and the Quinn Ranch, as it came to be known, was clearly prospering under their joint management. More importantly, anyone who saw them together could see the deep love and respect that characterized their relationship. Marcus remained a constant presence in their lives, often riding out to the ranch for Sunday dinners and helping Nora with large commissions. He had aged noticeably since Timothy's death, but there was a new lightness to him, a contentment that came from seeing his daughter so thoroughly happy. It was Marcus who first suspected, in the late summer of 1879, that Nora was pregnant. She had been feeling unwell in the mornings, and there was a certain glow about her that he recognized from his own wife's pregnancies. "Daughter," he said one Sunday afternoon when Wesley was out checking the herd, "is there something you need to tell me?" Nora looked up from the pie she was making, her hands stilling in the dough. "I think I might be with child," she admitted. "I have not told Wesley yet. I wanted to be certain first." "And how do you feel about it?" Marcus asked carefully. Nora considered the question. "Terrified," she said honestly, "and thrilled, and worried about how it will affect my work, and excited to meet this little person we have created, all of those things at once." "That is normal," Marcus assured her. "Your mother felt much the same way." "But Nora, you know you do not have to choose between being a mother and being a blacksmith, do you not? You can be both." "Can I, though?" Nora asked. "Truly, how does one manage an infant and a forge?" "The same way people have always managed," Marcus replied. "With help, with planning, and with a partner who shares the load. Which, fortunately, you have." When Nora told Wesley that evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, and then immediately set her down gently as if suddenly afraid she might break. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "Nora, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Wesley replied. "I am overjoyed, I am honored, I am completely terrified, and I am absolutely certain that you are going to be the most remarkable mother." "I do not want to stop working," Nora said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know that probably sounds selfish, but—" "It does not sound selfish at all," Wesley interrupted firmly. "It sounds like you being honest about who you are. We will figure it out, Nora. You can keep working as long as you are comfortable doing so, and after the baby comes, we will adjust our routines to accommodate both your craft and our child. That is what partners do. They adapt and support each other." Their son was born in early March of 1880, delivered by the midwife from town with Wesley and Marcus anxiously pacing outside the bedroom door. It was a long labor, nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Nora wondered if she had the strength to continue. But then she thought of all the times she had pushed through exhaustion at the forge, all the difficult projects she had completed through sheer determination, and she found reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced, and the midwife pronounced both mother and child healthy, the relief was overwhelming. Wesley was allowed into the room, and Nora would never forget the expression on his face when he first saw his son, a mixture of awe and love and humility that brought tears to both their eyes. They named him Marcus William Quinn, after both their fathers, and called him Will for short. He had Wesley's dark hair and Nora's green eyes, and from the very beginning, he had a strong will and a lusty cry that suggested he would not be an easy child. Nora took 2 months away from the forge after Will's birth, focusing on recovering her strength and learning how to care for this demanding little person who had entered their lives. But by the time spring was properly underway, she was itching to return to her work, and Wesley helped her fashion a solution. A sturdy cradle that could be moved into the smithy, positioned far enough from the forge to be safe, but close enough that Nora could keep an eye on Will while she worked. It was not always easy. There were days when Will was fussy and would not settle, when Nora had to abandon a project midway to nurse him or change him or simply hold him until he calmed. But there were also days when he would lie in his cradle, watching the play of light from the forge with wide, fascinated eyes, and Nora would work in a state of perfect contentment, creating beautiful things while her son observed. Wesley was as involved a father as Nora was a mother. He fashioned a carrier that allowed him to strap Will to his chest while he worked around the ranch, and he took night feedings whenever possible to give Nora the rest she needed. Marcus was a doting grandfather, riding out to the ranch several times a week to spend time with his namesake. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the steady growth of both their family and their ranch. In the fall of 1882, Nora gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara Rose. She was an easier baby than Will had been, content and cheerful, and she seemed to love the sound of the hammer on the anvil, often falling asleep to its rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper. Wesley proved to have an excellent eye for cattle, and their herd grew steadily through careful breeding and acquisition. They hired 2 permanent hands, young men who lived in a bunkhouse Wesley built and who worked hard for fair wages and the kind of respectful treatment that was all too rare in the ranching world. Nora's reputation as a blacksmith had spread beyond Idaho City. She received commissions from as far away as Boise City, creating everything from ornamental gates to specialized tools. A wealthy mine owner paid her handsomely to create an elaborate iron staircase for his home, a project that took 3 months and challenged every skill she possessed. When it was completed and installed, people came from miles around just to see it, and Nora's pride in her work was matched only by Wesley's pride in his wife's accomplishment. In the spring of 1885, tragedy struck when Marcus Vickers suffered a stroke while working in the town's smithy. He survived, but the left side of his body was weakened, and it was clear he would never be able to work the forge again. Without discussion, Nora and Wesley invited him to live with them on the ranch, converting a downstairs room into a comfortable bedroom for him. Marcus protested at first, not wanting to be a burden, but Nora would hear none of it. "You gave me everything," she told him firmly. "You taught me, supported me, believed in me when no one else did. Now it is my turn to take care of you, and I will not hear another word of argument." Marcus settled into ranch life with surprising ease. Though he could no longer work metal, he could still advise, and Nora often consulted with him on complex projects. He also discovered a talent for entertaining his grandchildren, spending hours telling them stories and teaching them everything from reading to the names of birds and trees. Will, at 5 years old, was already showing signs of his mother's stubborn determination. He was fascinated by the smithy, though Nora and Wesley were careful to establish strict safety rules about when and how he could be near the forge. Clara, at 3, was more interested in animals, following her father around as he tended the cattle and horses, her small hand trustingly held in his larger one. The ranch now encompassed nearly 300 acres, as Wesley had been able to purchase adjacent parcels from neighbors looking to sell. Their herd had grown to over 200 head, a size that required them to take on additional seasonal help during roundups and brandings. They had built a proper barn, expanded the house to include more bedrooms and a large kitchen, and even installed a hand pump in the kitchen itself, a luxury that Nora appreciated every time she did not have to haul water from the creek. But for all their material success, what Nora treasured most was the life they had built together. Every morning, she woke in Wesley's arms, and every night, they fell asleep discussing the events of the day and making plans for tomorrow. They still made time for each other despite the demands of ranch work and child rearing, stealing moments alone whenever possible, keeping the romance alive through small gestures and shared laughter. On their 8th wedding anniversary, in December of 1885, Wesley gave Nora a gift that made her weep. A beautifully crafted tool set, each piece made from the finest steel, with her initials inlaid in silver on the handles. "I had them made by a craftsman in San Francisco," Wesley explained as Nora examined each tool with trembling hands. "I wanted you to have instruments worthy of your skill. You are an artist, Nora, and every artist deserves the best tools available." "They are magnificent," Nora said, running her finger over the smooth handle of a hammer that was perfectly weighted and balanced. "But Wesley, the cost is irrelevant," Wesley said firmly. "You have given me 8 years of joy, 2 beautiful children, and a partnership that makes me grateful every single day. If I spent every penny we have on showing you how much I love and appreciate you, it would not be enough." That night, after the children were asleep and Marcus had retired to his room, Nora and Wesley sat together in front of the fireplace, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "You remember that day by the creek?" Nora asked softly. "When you asked me to forge a future with you at my anvil, every detail," Wesley replied. "I was terrified you would say no." "I am so glad I said yes," Nora said. "I could not have imagined back then how good this life would be, how complete I would feel." "You kept every promise you made that day, Wesley. Every single one. And I will keep on keeping them," Wesley assured her. "For the rest of my life, Nora, that is my promise and my privilege." The years continued to roll forward, marked by the changing seasons and the steady rhythm of ranch life. In 1887, Nora gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named James Marcus, called Jamie. In 1889, their 4th and final child arrived, a daughter they named Rose Marie. Their family was complete, a house full of noise and love and constant activity. Will, at 10 years old, was already helping his father with the cattle, showing the same natural affinity for horses and ranching that Wesley possessed. Clara, at 8, had proven to have her mother's talent with metalwork. She spent hours in the smithy with Nora, learning the basics of the craft, and though she was still too young to handle the heavy hammers, she showed real promise in her understanding of metal and heat. Jamie, at 4, was the family comedian, always ready with a joke or a funny face to make his siblings laugh. Baby Rose, at just 6 months old, was the darling of the entire family, doted on by her older siblings and grandparents alike. Marcus, now in his late 60s, had slowed considerably since his stroke, but his mind remained sharp and his love for his family unwavering. He spent his days in a chair on the porch, watching the life of the ranch unfold around him, offering advice when asked and wisdom whether solicited or not. One evening in the summer of 1890, as the family gathered for supper around the large table Wesley had built when their family started growing, Nora looked around at the faces she loved and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly took her breath away. There was Wesley at the head of the table, helping Jamie cut his meat while simultaneously keeping Rose from throwing her food. There were her children, all healthy and happy, each one unique, but all of them secure in the knowledge that they were loved. There was her father, gray-haired and slower than he once was, but still present, still part of their daily lives. And there was the knowledge, always present but especially sharp in moments like these, that she had everything she had ever wanted, even the things she had not known she wanted. She had her craft, her smithy where she still created beautiful and functional metalwork. She had her family, the husband who loved her as an equal partner, and the children who made every day an adventure. She had a ranch that was thriving, land that would be passed down through generations, a legacy built on hard work and mutual respect. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" Will asked, noticing her reflective expression. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Nora replied honestly. "About how grateful I am for this life we have built together, all of us." "We are the lucky ones," Wesley said, catching her eye across the table. "Your mother could have chosen an easier path, one that followed convention and expectation. But she chose to be true to herself, and in doing so, she taught all of us that we can be who we are meant to be without apology or compromise." "I could not have done it without you," Nora pointed out. "You made it possible, Wesley. You and your unwavering support and belief in me." "Partners," Wesley said simply, raising his water glass. "In this life and always." "Partners," Nora echoed, touching her glass to his, and the children joined in with their own glasses, Jamie and Rose enthusiastically sloshing water onto the table in their excitement, and everyone laughed. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet except for the usual creaks and sighs of a well-lived-in home, Nora and Wesley walked out to the smithy together. It had become something of a tradition for them. These evening walks to the place where Nora's craft lived, a way to reconnect after busy days and stolen moments. They stood in the doorway, looking at the anvil that had been the center of Nora's world for so many years, and she leaned back against Wesley's chest, his arms coming around to hold her close. "You ever regret it?" she asked, the question that still occasionally surfaced despite 13 years of happiness. Taking on a wife who was so unconventional, who would not give up her work to be a traditional helpmate. "Never," Wesley said without hesitation. "Not once, not even for a moment." "You are exactly who you were meant to be, Nora. A blacksmith, a wife, a mother, a partner. All of those things at once, without contradiction or compromise. You are my greatest adventure, my most profound joy, and the best decision I ever made was asking you to forge a future with me at your anvil." "We have forged a good future," Nora agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "A strong one built to last, just like one of your horseshoes," Wesley said with a grin, and Nora laughed, swatting his chest playfully. "Romantic as always," she teased. "I try," Wesley replied. And then he kissed her, deep and sweet, with all the passion and tenderness that had characterized their relationship from the very beginning. The years that followed brought the expected joys and sorrows of life. Marcus passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1893, surrounded by family and dying as he had lived, with dignity and love. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could eternally watch over the family he had helped build. The children grew and flourished. Will took on more responsibility at the ranch, proving to be a natural leader and inheriting his father's skills with livestock. When he turned 18 in 1893, Wesley officially made him a partner in the ranch operations, recognizing that the boy had become a man and deserved acknowledgement of his contributions. Clara's talent for blacksmithing only grew stronger as she matured. By the time she was 16 in 1898, She was creating pieces that rivaled her mother's work. And together, Nora and Clara expanded the smithy's operations, taking on larger and more complex commissions. There was talk, among the more progressive circles, of the famous Vickers women blacksmiths, and orders came from across Idaho and even from surrounding territories. Jamie, with his quick wit and easy charm, surprised everyone by announcing at 15 that he wanted to study law. Wesley and Nora supported his ambition without hesitation, and in 1900 they sent him to study in Boise City, proud of their son's intellectual pursuits and confident that the ranch could support his education. Rose, the baby of the family, turned out to be the most conventional of their children, with a love of cooking and sewing and all the domestic arts. But in the Quinn household, conventional was just as valued as unconventional, and Rose's talents were celebrated and encouraged just as much as Clara's metalwork or Jamie's academic achievements. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the turn of the century, they were one of the most successful operations in the region, known for quality cattle and ethical business practices. Wesley had bought out 2 more neighboring parcels, and the Quinn Ranch now encompassed over 500 acres of prime grazing and timber land. But more important than any material success was the legacy Nora and Wesley had created. A family built on love and respect, where each person was valued for who they were rather than who society said they should be. Their marriage had become the stuff of local legend, the story of the blacksmith's daughter and the cowboy who had promised to forge a future with her, who had kept that promise through hard work, unwavering support, and a love that deepened with each passing year. In the spring of 1905, Will married a young woman named Sarah Thompson, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. It was a good match, built on genuine affection and shared values, and Nora and Wesley welcomed Sarah into the family with open arms. When Will and Sarah announced they were expecting their first child in early 1906, Nora was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. The baby, a boy they named Wesley Marcus Quinn after his grandfather and great-grandfather, was born in October of 1906. When Nora held her grandson for the first time, looking into his tiny face and seeing echoes of Wesley and Will and even her own father, she felt the circle complete in a way that was both profound and deeply satisfying. "What are you thinking?" Wesley asked, standing beside her as they watched Will and Sarah with their new son. "I am thinking about continuity," Nora replied. "About how we have built something that will outlast us, that will go on long after we are gone. This ranch, our children, now our grandchildren. It is a legacy, Wesley. The life we forged together at the Anvil. The finest piece of craftsmanship either of us will ever create," Wesley agreed, slipping his arm around her waist. They were in their 50s now, the years showing in the silver threading through Wesley's dark hair and the fine lines around Nora's eyes. But they were both still strong, still active in the daily operations of the ranch and smithy, still deeply in love after nearly 3 decades of marriage. Clara married in 1907, choosing as her husband a skilled carpenter named David Morrison, who appreciated her talents and supported her work without reservation. Together, they opened a combined operation, a carpentry and metalwork shop in Idaho City that quickly became known for custom work of the highest quality. Nora and Wesley helped them get established, providing both financial support and hard-won business advice. Jamie graduated from his studies and returned to Idaho Territory as a qualified attorney. Rather than setting up practice in Boise City as his parents expected, he chose to return to Idaho City, wanting to serve the community that had raised him. He took on cases for miners and small ranchers who could not afford fancy lawyers, building a reputation for integrity and fairness. Rose, at 18, announced her intention to marry Thomas Fletcher, the son of the general store owner in town. It was a love match, clear to anyone who saw them together, and Wesley walked his youngest daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, proud of the woman she had become even as he mourned the end of her childhood. The years rolled on, marked by births and deaths, successes and challenges. The ranch weathered a severe drought in 1910 that tested their resources and resilience. Wesley's health gave them a scare in 1912 when he came down with pneumonia, but he recovered fully thanks to Nora's devoted nursing and his own stubborn determination. Through it all, the smithy continued to operate. Nora, even as she aged, never lost her love for the craft or her skill with hammer and anvil. She trained not only Clara but several of her grandchildren, passing down her knowledge and expertise to a new generation. On their 40th wedding anniversary in December of 1917, the entire family gathered at the ranch house to celebrate. All 4 children were there with their spouses, and there were now 8 grandchildren ranging in age from 11 down to just a few months old. The house was full of noise and laughter and love, exactly as it had been throughout the decades of Nora and Wesley's marriage. That evening, after the guests had departed and the grandchildren had been settled into various bedrooms and makeshift sleeping areas, Nora and Wesley stood together on their porch, looking out over the land they had built their life upon. 40 years, Nora mused. It seems like both a lifetime and just yesterday. The best 40 years a man could ask for, Wesley replied, pulling her close against the winter chill. You have given me everything, Nora. A family, a home, a partnership that has been the foundation of my entire adult life. I look at what we have created, all of this, and I am humbled by it. We created it together, Nora reminded him. That is what partnership means. Neither of us could have built this life alone. It took both of us, working together, supporting each other, believing in each other. Just like forging metal, Wesley observed. It takes heat and pressure and time and skill. You cannot rush the process, and you have to be willing to work hard to shape something beautiful and lasting. Nora laughed, delighted by the metaphor. When did you become so poetic about blacksmithing? When I spent 40 years married to a blacksmith, Wesley replied. I have learned a thing or two about the craft, even if I have never wielded a hammer myself. They stood there in comfortable silence, and Nora felt a contentment so deep and complete that it was almost painful in its intensity. She had lived a full life, had been true to herself while also building something larger than herself. She had not had to choose between her craft and her family, had not had to sacrifice one dream for another. Instead, she had found a partner who helped her achieve both, who saw no contradiction in a woman being strong and skilled and maternal all at once. Thank you, she said softly. For what? Wesley asked. For seeing me, Nora replied. For recognizing who I was and loving me for it rather than in spite of it. For building this life with me, for keeping every promise you made that day by the creek, for being exactly the partner you promised to be. It has been my honor and my joy, Wesley said simply. Every single day. As they stood there, the wind whispered through the pines and carried the faint scent of wood smoke from the chimney. Inside, their children and grandchildren slept under the roof they had provided. Beyond them, in the darkness, were the pastures and barns and outbuildings of the ranch they had built together. And not far away stood the smithy, Nora's sanctuary and workplace, the physical embodiment of her refusal to be defined by others' expectations. It was a good life, Nora thought. No, it was better than good. It was extraordinary, not because it was easy or perfect, but because it was authentic. She had lived on her own terms while also loving deeply and being loved in return. She had created beautiful things with her hands and raised beautiful humans with her heart. She had been exactly who she was meant to be. The years that followed brought the natural progression of aging. Wesley developed arthritis in his hands, making some ranch tasks difficult, but he adapted, focusing more on management and training the younger generation. Nora's shoulders bothered her sometimes after long days at the forge, but she learned to pace herself, to take breaks when needed, to accept that she could not work quite as long or as hard as she once had. But they were still together, still partners, still deeply in love. They held hands during dinner, stole kisses in the hallway, and fell asleep each night wrapped in each other's arms. The passion had evolved and deepened over the decades, becoming something richer and more profound than the initial rush of new love. They knew each other completely, all the strengths and flaws and quirks that made them uniquely themselves, and they loved each other not despite those things but because of them. In the spring of 1925, they celebrated their 48th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them having dinner in the ranch house kitchen. Their children had wanted to arrange a party, but Nora and Wesley had requested something simpler, wanting time alone together to reflect on the life they had shared. "If you could go back," Nora asked as they sat together after the meal, "knowing everything that would happen, would you change anything?" Wesley considered the question seriously before answering. "I would have asked you to marry me that first day," he said with a slight smile. "Why waste those 6 weeks of courtship when I knew from the moment I saw you that you were the woman I wanted to spend my life with?" Nora laughed. "I would have thought you were insane and probably would have said no." "Probably," Wesley agreed. "Which is why things happened exactly as they should. But honestly, Nora, I would not change a single thing. Every joy, every challenge, every moment of happiness or difficulty has brought us to here, to this life we have built. How could I want to change any of it?" "I feel the same way," Nora admitted. "Even the hard parts, the losses and the struggles, they made us who we are. They deepened our appreciation for the good times and strengthened our bond." As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, Wesley's health began to decline more noticeably. He tired more easily, and there were days when he struggled to catch his breath after minimal exertion. The doctor diagnosed a weakening heart, the inevitable result of 73 years of hard living and hard work. Wesley faced this final challenge with the same courage and grace he had brought to every other aspect of his life. He made sure all his affairs were in order, that the ranch would transition smoothly to Will's full ownership, that each of his children and grandchildren knew how much he loved them. But mostly, he spent his time with Nora, treasuring every moment they had left together. On a crisp October morning in 1925, Wesley passed away peacefully in his sleep, Nora lying beside him as she had for 48 years. She woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still clasped in hers. The grief was overwhelming, a pain so deep and profound that she wondered how she would survive it. But survive it she did, because that was what Wesley would have wanted. She mourned him deeply and genuinely, wore black for a year as was proper, and visited his grave on the hill beside her father's every single day. But she also continued living, continued working, continued being present for her children and grandchildren. The smithy became her solace in those difficult months after Wesley's death. There, surrounded by the tools and the heat and the familiar rhythm of hammer on anvil, she felt closest to him. She could almost hear his voice encouraging her, feel his presence supporting her, just as he had for nearly 5 decades. Clara, now in her 40s and a master blacksmith in her own right, worked alongside her mother during this time, providing companionship and understanding without requiring words. They created some of their finest work during those months, as if channeling grief into artistry, transforming pain into beauty through the ancient alchemy of their craft. Nora lived for another 7 years after Wesley's passing, remaining active and engaged with life until the very end. She taught her grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, the basics of blacksmithing. She attended weddings and birthday parties and holiday celebrations. She rocked babies and told stories and passed down the wisdom earned through decades of living fully and authentically. But every night, she slept on what had been Wesley's side of the bed, wrapping herself in his old shirt, remembering the feel of his arms around her and the sound of his heartbeat under her ear. She missed him with an ache that never fully subsided, but she also felt grateful beyond measure for the life they had shared. On a warm June evening in 1932, Nora Vickers Quinn passed away peacefully at the age of 77, surrounded by her children and several of her grandchildren. Her last words, whispered so softly that only Clara heard them, were simple and profound. "Tell him I am coming. Tell him I kept my promise. We forged a future together, and it was beautiful." They buried her beside Wesley on the hill, and the entire town of Idaho City turned out for her funeral. She had been a fixture in their community for over half a century, a woman who had defied convention and exceeded expectations, who had shown that strength and femininity were not mutually exclusive, that a woman could be a skilled craftsperson and a devoted wife and mother all at once. The smithy continued to operate for many more years, first under Clara's management and later under her daughter's. The Quinn Ranch remained in the family, passing through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation that Nora and Wesley had built. And on the wall of the smithy, now a fourth-generation operation, hung a framed photograph taken on Nora and Wesley's 25th wedding anniversary. In it, they stood together in front of the forge, his arm around her waist, her hand on his chest, both of them looking not at the camera but at each other. Their faces showed the lines and marks of a life well lived, but more than that, they showed a love so deep and true that it transcended the photograph itself. Below the picture was a small brass plaque, added by their children after both parents had passed, with an inscription that captured the essence of their extraordinary partnership. Nora Vickers and Wesley Quinn, who proved that love and partnership could forge a future as strong and lasting as the finest steel. 1877 to forever. The story of the blacksmith's daughter and the cowboy who asked her to forge a future with him at her anvil became part of Idaho Territory's history, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when two people truly saw each other, truly respected each other, and truly committed to building something together. It was a reminder that the strongest relationships were partnerships of equals, that love flourished best when both people were free to be their authentic selves, and that the most beautiful futures were those forged together, with patience and skill and unwavering dedication. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the ranch that Wesley started and practiced the blacksmithing craft that Nora mastered, carrying forward a legacy built not on wealth or fame but on love, respect, and the courage to live authentically. And whenever someone asks about the photograph on the smithy wall, the current generation tells the story with pride, of a woman who refused to be limited by society's expectations, of a man who had the wisdom to recognize her worth, and of a partnership that proved, once and for all, that the strongest things are those forged with both heat and heart, with both skill and love, at the anvil where two lives become one extraordinary journey.